think that when I started seeing myself not involved in conversations, that's a bigger thing. Or it's like less about like overall goals and what we're working on and just being like finish this one task. And then the lack of autonomy. I think those are flags for me where it's like, okay, I'm a partner at your table with you, and this is what we talked about. I'm not just someone you hand off work down to. Let's have a conversation.
Hey guys, that voice you just heard is Anita, and Anita is the first guest of the Infraction podcast. Sam, do you want to give a quick intro to who Anita is?
Yeah, so Anita was one of those voices that was very active from the get go. As soon as we put out the bat signal for Infraction, and to start growing the community, she jumped straight in. She's been an awesome help. But more about her, I suppose. She's a fractional CMO. A lot of experience, and she'll go into her story, but she's got a lot of experience working with startups. She's kind of like been a deep part of the Toronto startup scene because that kicked off. As far as I can tell, I'm not a big expert, but it seems like that really kicked off sort of like 5-10 years ago, and that started to become like a hotbed for Canada's startups. So she got a lot of experience with that, and like most people, she started out with consulting, so like made her way to fractional, and she covers what that means to her in the show as well, which is really cool. But she's been deep in that for the last 4 years, so she got a lot of insights, she got a lot of experience, she's seen a lot, and we did our best to pull all of that out of her in today's show.
Going into this, I actually was trying to navigate the conversation to say there'll be a bunch of fractionals that listen to this. So we want to unpack the world of being a fractional and learning from her best practices, learning scar tissue, all that good stuff. And then I was also trying to then get some of the functional expertise in, but we didn't get to that in this show because I think the first show, there's so much that she shared about being a fractional and some of her learnings. So this show is all about really Anita as a fractional. And when we bring her back for session 2 and onwards, which I hope she wants to come back to do more, but I guess we'll find out if she enjoyed it or not. That's when we'll get into, I guess, the functional expertise. One thing that really resonated with me was she said this phrase, becoming like an advocate for yourself, and you'll get to learn a little bit more about what that is. Guys, enough from me and Sam. Let's get into this conversation with Anita. Enjoy.
Welcome to Infraction, the podcast where we unpack everything that we're learning from building the go-to resource for all things fractional.
Every week, we're sharing insights that we're learning from our community of fractional leaders, as well as the highs, the lows, and all of the lessons of building a business from the ground up. By the way, I'm Adam.
And I'm Sam. Now let's get into today's show.
Anita, thank you so much for joining us on the Infraction podcast. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Beautiful day in Toronto. I'm doing well. Thank you. How are both of you?
I'm good. Yeah. Apart from for everyone that's watching it on the YouTubes, they'll see that I have a fairly solid glow of my head because I didn't put sun cream on at the weekend. I'm in the UK and we don't often get the sun. And I'm a firm believer that we can't get burnt by UK sun. And I was proven wrong at the weekend. So I'm very warm, got a good glow. Sam, we haven't spoke today. How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm good as well. Yeah, I'm a little bit red. I was out in the mountains yesterday, so we were up early, got some sunrise in the mountains of Wales. So it was good, enjoying the sun while it lasted because it's gone again today. So anyway, typical UK weather chat to start the show. Let's go.
Made it this far without getting a sunburn, so that says something, right?
Every year as I like do my own thing, I just realize I get less and less hair. And this is the year that I just went and now Bic razor it off and I'm now fully exposed to the sun. But anyway, enough of my hair routine and sunburn. Anita, you put your hand up early doors to say, hey, this thing that you guys are building looks interesting. Before we get into learning a little bit more about you, I don't think I've asked you like directly or at least on the record. What was it that made you go, hey, this thing that you're building at Infraction is interesting?
Yeah, I guess I've been working fractionally for about 4 years, with a little bit of like a break in between. And one of the things I noticed was how very lonely it can get. And I think that just, this is a growing cohort of people. And one of the things is like, we need each other. We need networks. As humans, we need connection. And when I saw someone building something, I was like, I ran. I didn't walk. I ran to try to figure out how to get involved because it's like, this is what I've been looking for. And also, it gives us such a gives us a community, a network, and a legitimacy that I think isn't out there yet. So yeah, really keen on it. And I was like, okay, someone's doing it and I gotta support it.
Absolutely love that and appreciate running towards it. You've been so instrumental, especially in our first few sessions, by having a voice and supporting some of the conversations and topics. But before we get into some of the details, the nuts and bolts of what I want to unpack with you today, let's just learn a bit about who you are, Anita. Give us a background. Like, where did your career start? You said you've been doing fractional work for 4 years. What happened before that time? Do a bit of scene setting for us.
Oh yeah. If you'd asked me like 15 years ago, this is where I would be with my career, I would say no. I actually started off my journey thinking I'd be a lawyer and eventually getting into government and maybe running for something like Canadian politics. And that's kind of how I geared my whole life. I got into a legal job and I ended up hating it. So I was studying for my LSAT, which is the entrance exams in Canada and the US for law school. And I ended up really not liking it. And during that time, I actually was one of the founding members of an organic tampon company and I got bitten by the business bug. And I was like, oh, I can actually do something like this. And that kind of like set the stage for me ending up getting into business. And I had no background in it. I actually have no formal training in marketing. I have a background in PR, which then translated eventually into marketing. I got my master's in PR just at the time that it was becoming more digital. So I ended up just learning on the job. And I worked at a lobby group for about through 2 years, 2.5, 3 years, realized that it was a little slow for me and jumped right into tech just as Toronto became a really big tech hub. And from there, the rest was history. So I started off just running marketing departments and really got into it. I ended up really loving it. And the fast-paced nature of startups is that you learn everything, you learn fast, and you wear many hats. And in like the next like 7, 8 years, I worked at 4 to 5 different companies from the ground up while working on my own things on the side. And so while I worked full time, I would always do things on the side, including advising and helping different companies with consulting. And eventually, one of the companies during the pandemic, the company I was working with, it was a DEI company. Business just kind of went downhill, and I decided just to go off on my own. And that's when I started fractionally working for companies. And I had been working with some accelerators and kind of like tech incubators for a bit, and that's kind of where I started working with early stage startups, and that's kind of where I've played for a long time. I took a little bit of a break in between. I was approached by a fintech to start working with them, a Series A fintech based in Toronto, based in Vancouver, working in Toronto. And then, unfortunately, after 2 years of scaling that business across North America, the mortgage interest rates went up and unfortunately the company shut down. So I went full force back into working for myself. And here I am today and loving it.
I love all that, and you've given an absolute whistle stop tour of your career. There are so many things that I like out of pure curiosity I would love to jump into, but I kind of want to be respectful of the audience right now because I think we've got kind of potentially like two people listening to this. There's other fractionals that are thinking, all right, Anita's a fractional. Or I guess even like people that are thinking about going fractional and going, actually, how do I make that leap? And then there'll be other people that are listening to this for just more of the, I guess, the functional expertise. So people that want to learn about marketing, what's new, what's best practice, what do I need to be paying attention to right now? So I want to try and like drive it down those two paths. So I'll start with the fractional side.
Just before you do, can I just ask a quick question? Not to derail the conversation. Apologies. I just want to know what it was like to work in that, like with those accelerators in Toronto. Like, what was it like to get in on the ground floor with some of those startups and help them grow? That just sounds really exciting. So I'm curious to know what that's like.
Yeah, I think like it's the one thing that I walked away with, like ultimately is just really embracing uncertainty. I think the nature of startups, especially at that point, is like you have to have conviction, you have to believe in what they're doing because you have that can sustain you through the ups and downs because there will be ups and downs with startups, and there's like a lot of uncertainty. You don't know kind of who you're talking to, you don't know how you're gonna make sales, but you have to believe in the mission. And so I think that's what kind of has been always exciting about them. But yeah, you learn a lot.
Yeah, I suppose that is like that's a thing with that's a thing that kind of separates a startup and sometimes makes is the deal breaker between success and failure, right? Which is like the mission, the actual mission that the startup's on, and like how much they can weather the storm by believing in that mission. So I suppose that's awesome, though, right? To come in on the ground level as a CMO or a fractional CMO behind a startup that's really mission focused, because I'm assuming that it allows you to do your stuff a lot easier.
Absolutely. And I think like one of the biggest things is like I as a person need that connection to it. It drives me to work harder and connect with what I'm doing. And I think a lot of people are that way. I mean, I think people care about the work they're doing and they want to do like they want to work with companies and even shop from we see the stats for like, how people are buying. We want to see our brands mirror us back, right? So if I'm working on something, I want to be able to say like I'm proud of what I'm doing. I love our mission. I love what we're driving towards. But that's kind of very important at the very beginning because there's some cases, even with like, I was at a Series A, moving towards a Series B fintech, and we had everything right. And even when everything's going right, sometimes even the market conditions stop you from growing. Not even just like sometimes there's the we don't know who we're talking about. We don't have a product that works, and or maybe we just don't have funding. But then there's also like market conditions actually can stop you. So you kind of have to learn how to just flow with things. And also, the most exciting thing I think about startups in a general sense is that anything you do, big or small, will move the needle. So, in coming from a place where I was in government, where I felt like I was just doing things for the sake of doing it.
You're like a tiny cog in a massive machine when you're in something like government, right?
I've got to pull on that thread slightly now. You've opened it, Sam. I can't help myself.
Sorry, do you
No,
want
I
to
love.
derail the podcast, right?
No, I love it. This is the fun stuff. Anita, as you sort of talk about that mission focus, because you've probably been exposed to so many different like founders and companies. What are the traits? I think having like a narrator that can actually really clearly communicate and articulate the mission and vision of the business is really important. What are the traits that you've spotted in founders early on that have signaled to you like this has a higher chance of success because of these people and their mission? Like, what are the things that you've seen in people that go, if they do this, that's a really strong signal that they are going to over-index on their chance of. And don't get me wrong, running a startup, everyone's got to get a plan until they get punched in the face. Like it's really hard to build anything. What are the traits that you see in founders that you think are going to set them up for success when it comes to their mission?
Yeah, I think flexibility, big, I think having conviction is a very important trait of a CEO and also build it like believing in a vision, a bigger sense of vision. Like even if it seems like out of the realm of imagination or possibility, seeing someone who has that kind of longer term vision is very important because they need to lead. A lot of the CEOs I work with don't necessarily have grounding in reality, which is okay because they'll have people around them that will help them with that. But the number one trait,
By the
I
way, I
love
think it's so important as well. It's like having, if you are that like lofty, massive vision. I mean, when you were saying that, I was like, well, what's the difference between actually having a big vision and just being completely wildly unrealistic? But I guess if you've got the team to sweep up after you and support and execute on the big vision, I guess they're the two things that need to be in place.
Visionary and integration, right? Like you need both.
Yeah, and then the other thing I think on the other side of that is in like just generally what I've noticed is that people and CEOs and leaders who are willing to talk to customers will know their customer better, which means they'll build products and sell better to their customers. And I can't tell you how many CEOs I've worked with and co-founders that will not prioritize talking or having user interviews, which I think is actually a red flag for me at this point.
That is a great topic. That is like hot take, not topic. That is a great little chunk of information there, which I think I completely resonate with that, by the way, is those founders. And I guess I guess even the early team, the 2 to 5 people teams, they have to be obsessed with just picking up the phone, speaking to the customers and knowing exactly what they're going through. I actually went through my very first experience was at a company called Startup 48. And it was a 48-hour weekend, which was like pizzas, beers, built like 30 people. You don't know each other. You get together, you break off into teams, and you basically start a business for 48 hours using the business model canvas. And once we'd got the business model and what we wanted to exist, the first thing they did was say, go and validate this with your potential clients. Don't build it in silo. Walk the streets, pick up the phone, send some cold emails, and try and get some response some way. Now, I'm going to try and do a absolute professional segue back to the original topic here that I wanted to unpack. So Anita, you talked about vision and mission. Um, when you decided to go fractional, what was the vision that you were on for your practice?
But I think, if I can be honest, it felt like I was feeling my way in the dark at the very beginning. I think I knew that so I had done so much work with so many different startups. And at that point, I'd seen a lot. And so I was like, you know what? I know I can do this alone, but I know who I want to work with. And part of it was working potentially with the wrong founders. So I wanted to work with the right people, doing the right good work. And I had lots of examples of like leadership that maybe didn't resonate with me. So I was like, I want to be that leader. I want to get to choose who I work with. I also love building marketing teams. And I know that's what I want to do, but I have to make sure I get a choice. So for me, it was about choice. And also I just really love learning. So being able to like pick across lots of different things. So my vision was I was curious, but I wanted autonomy and I wanted to feel engaged a lot and but also have governance over my time. I think especially after like working in tech, after when you get to a certain point, like you're throwing your body and your soul at this thing. And that's kind of the expectation. Like and but you do it because you know there's something at the end of it. You know there's gonna be something really big. And after the fintech I was working at closed down, I was just so suddenly like, oh, this is my second stab almost at going back into consulting and fractional work. And I was like, okay, what does this look like? I've tried it out first, a couple of years ago. I kind of like just dipped my toe into it. And then now I got to really shape it. So this time when I came back at it, I had such a clearer vision about who I was in that role, what I was good at, and what I wanted to bring to a team. And now I also had just really built out really good operations already. So I didn't have to worry about that. Now I could be like, okay, who do I want to work with? Where do I want to work? And how do I want to play?
You said a phrase coming into this to us before we hit record. I was like, how would you define what you do? And you said, I kind of am in that stage where I help them they learn to walk with you. Can you just unpack like what your engagements look like when you deal with, I guess, these founders and startups and just bring that to life? And then I want to kind of zoom in a little bit from there.
Yeah, because I think, sorry, just to chime in, I think that ties in with what you were talking about just a second ago, because it sounds to me like you had that break with the fintech, but you had the pre-fractional, maybe it was like more consulting at that point, and then after the fintech, by the sounds of things, it's like less consulting, more fractional. Just curious to, yeah, like Adam says, yeah, understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the fintech was almost a permission for me that I was like, oh, I've scaled a team across 2 countries. I have all of this experience. So then now maybe in my own head, I earn the mantle of fractional and I can do this. And I walked in with more confidence doing that. But yeah, so I just because of just like just given how long I've been in the startup space and you know I've really jumped into that. I really love it. I love like the fast paced nature. I didn't want to stop working with early stage startups. So when I came back to the fractional work, I was like, this is where I'm going to play. And now I know I'm going to do seed, pre seed, all the way up to Series A, Series B. They have to have some investment. I love working with early stage companies that potentially might have not built out a marketing department yet, or even have something but want to scale up a bit. But my main goal is to come in and help them learn how to walk. So that just means kind of like, okay, what is like a good foundational marketing operations look like? What are their channels? Who are they speaking to? What's their messaging and positioning? Like sometimes it's like, just let's get back to the basics. And even if you know or have a semblance of who you're speaking to, you might not even be doing it well. So let's just talk about that. Let's talk about your value props. Like super simple stuff sometimes, but it makes all the difference, So I come in, I build that out. I help them with the strategy. I work with them to define what resources they need, maybe pick 2 to 3 channels to really focus on and go from there.
Amazing. And I'm going to try and weave in some of the stuff for the fractionals listening for your practice, as well as the people listening from a marketing function perspective. When you talk about the foundations of a marketing function, when you go in, what are the first things that you're looking for? Is like, when you're trying to work out what's the opportunity, what are the signals here, where do I go and play? What's that first few weeks or months look like for you when you immerse into a company?
Yeah. So when I'm doing my initial like scoping with the client before we actually sign and before I join, I will send them like a set of discovery questions that kind of help me suss out what they need. I typically look at things like, okay, let's look at quarter by quarter or overall year. And just to like backtrack a bit, I typically work on a 6 or 12 month cycle. So when I say I help a lot of these startups learn how to walk, they should graduate from me. So I come in, I help them build that. And hopefully, if I'm doing my job right, or if I'm in a scenario where the company is able to give me the support I need to get my job done, then I can leave after 6 to 12 months. And that's the ultimate goal. Sometimes, in very rare occasions, I'll stay a little bit longer, just if I like it, if I like the team, and that's by, by my own design. But overall, I come in, I have the discovery questions, I create like a proposal of what we're going to be doing based off of the things I've learned. So like, are there any product launches? Are you working towards something? What have you tried in the past? I get a whole scope of the landscape before jumping in. And then from there I identify and propose like early stage, kind of like, what are we doing? Okay, so let's say 30, 60, 90 days, what does that look like? And then we do check-ins at every point. So the first 3 months are pretty much me just really, the first month, understanding everything that's going on. I did dive deep into data. I understand how everyone works. I look at the other teams. I understand how I fit in with the employees, get to know the team. If there are resources already on the team, if I have employees working with me, understanding how they've done stuff in the past. I do usually do like a funnel gap analysis. I understand kind of like where they play, what they've done, what's successful. Moving on to the second month, I typically look at, okay, now we're going to do some testing. And then we try to, pick a few things based off what I've learned or past data, and then say, okay, let's just try this. At the same time, I think a really big thing that I really hammer home is always looking at their positioning and messaging. If I can, I will get on the phone with a bunch of clients. I try to understand, who we're speaking to. I also try to understand like why people have churned, and maybe even speak to people who have churned in the past, and then get that data to actually then, work towards better messaging and positioning. The third month is all about experimentation and really, really refining how we work together. And then hopefully from there, we have something. So then from quarter by quarter, we build towards some of those goals. And then we identify maybe or even a longer term plan from there once I have a stable understanding of where they're going and what works so far.
Makes sense. So I guess those first 90 days, you kind of have like quite a structured process of how you onboard into that business. That makes sense if I'm thinking about like one business, but as a fractional, you'll be working on a couple of businesses. What experiences, challenges, pitfalls have you bumped into as a fractional when you are working on multiple clients at one time? How do you manage your time and how do you, I guess, set boundaries between work?
Ooh, that's tough. I think that, like, unfortunately, it's always learning about a scope creep and time creep and all of that stuff. And I am always learning. Let's be real. And I'm like also the type that's like, yeah, sure, I like you, so yeah, I'll do that extra hour or whatever because I'm like, it'll come out in the wash, like especially because like I end up really like because I have the choice of like working with really great people now. I just am like I end up genuinely just like becoming. I'm a joiner. I join, I get involved, and I'm like, oh, I love this, so I'll help you out. So this is an ongoing battle, and I think that what really helps me, and this is something I've learned, is really outlining everything in the statement of work that I create early on. So once the proposal is agreed to, when I'm still negotiating, I create a very detailed scope of work, and I need that for myself. It's not just for the client. It's for me to remember as well, like, hey, you have a very well defined understanding of where you should play, Anita, and anything above and beyond that, then you're actually taking away from your own time and time that you spend on other clients or your own leisure time, which is something that I've really built into what I do. So that being said, I typically will only take on 2 to 3 clients at once. Um, I will allot days to each client. So depending on how much like they need or based off of what we decided upon with the scope of work and the amount of time that I've allotted, like or the goals that we're going towards, I will allot specific amounts of time. So some clients will get like a Monday and Wednesday, and I'll be specifically available for them on those days. I'm on Slack, I'm on the calls, everything that I need to be on
Like
is there.
arrange all of like the meetings for those days and make sure that any sort of, I suppose, functional requirements are just happening within those time slots.
Exactly.
Be honest though, how often does it fall outside of those time slots? Because I know it does.
And like I know best intent, like I'm not like going to get mad about it, but like I typically will just be like, nope. Sometimes like it's just enough to me be like, no, I'm not attending, for me to say like no, because sometimes they'll be like, I'm just gonna put this in your calendar. Let's see if she notices it. And then sometimes I'll be like, no. But sometimes I'll say yeah, but then I'll come back later and be like, okay, just FYI, these are the days that we have allotted. I'm not available on the other days. Like if it's something important, let's say like I take Fridays off. That was a very big thing for me where I was like, no, I need this. So I take Fridays off, but like in like a couple weeks ago, one of my clients were like, oh, we just onboarded someone. We need to send this onboarding flow. Where can I find it? I'm there. I'm available. I'm not going to leave someone high and dry. I'm still like, that's the thing about Fractional. Like I am part of the team. Like I care deeply about what I'm doing and I want everyone to succeed. So I will jump on. It's okay. But it'll all come out in the wash, right? So I really believe in that, and I do best effort to keep those things kind of, um, you know, time boxed in their own little
Boxed. Yeah, it's
column.
like they're boxed, but maybe there's just like rough around the edges every now and then, right? But that's part of the role, right? And I think that's one of the challenges that we all face is doing fractional work, because you technically, you are self-employed, right? So you're working for yourself. Um,
But Sam, it's the same as like an FTE, because we're fractional. We're integrating to the team. Like every FTE has their like a full time employment contract, and it's like, hey, you work 9 till 5, but no one works 9 till 5. There's stuff that goes on in the morning. You get a WhatsApp in the evening, and I think as a fractional, we're exposed to that same level of integration as well.
that's what I was the point I was getting at. Yeah, it's like you're exposed to that. But I would actually argue that we I think as a fractional, you are more exposed to working longer hours than you would be as an FTE, because I feel like it's more acceptable for most people to sort of like shut off between after 9 and 5, right? Or have those allotted work hours. Maybe there's some overtime that happens in certain situations, and depending on like what type of company that you work for. But like as a fractional, because we are sort of managing our own time, we have multiple clients. My point is that that can easily bleed into just all the time, if that makes sense. Like managing stuff all the time.
Yeah, I think your build here is like across multiple clients, when they all just push it 10% or one extra meeting across 3 or 4 clients, that adds up pretty quickly. But I think one thing we're exposed to as well is like with Anita being a CMO, it's at a senior leadership team level. Like you're never on a 9 to 5. You're kind of on an always on as a full time employee. So there is that kind of expectation as well. Anita, you mentioned that statement of work piece there, and I just wanted to loop back to that because I think it's such an important note that you said around it's kind of a tool to get fully aligned, not just for the client, but for you as well. What happens in your world when a client is pushing outside of that statement of work? How do you tackle that?
I typically will have check-ins once a week with my clients. It's actually in the same of work. I put in things like bi-weekly meetings, or we have a team meeting, and if you need me to be on another meeting, you have to give me notice, and I will agree. Just don't assume, right? So things like that. But I have check-ins. With those check-ins, I will come back and say, okay, listen, I did notice that there's quite a few meetings that I actually should be part of. In the future, let's make sure they're aligned on these days that I'm available. I do want to be part of it. Of course, it's very important for me to be at the table. So just let's be aware of those things. Or if someone, I've had situations with like, founders or CEOs that I'm working closely with that will not give me the autonomy. Will say like, Anita, you're running this on your own, but then we'll go do stuff to the contrary. And in those cases too, I think like I'll have a couple conversations. I'll be very clear. I think thankfully I am an advocate for myself. You have to be, if you're in a role like this, like you have to constantly advocate for yourself and your own needs. And again, having a statement of work has helped me as a person understand what my rules and rights are that are agreed upon by both parties. So I can always go back to that if I ever feel bad, which I can feel like bad about like, being like no and being firm. But I think like in the case of someone who's consistently, crossing a boundary or not living up to their agreement. So like, for example, I had one CEO that had, like, I was running the marketing department, and I woke up one day and he had fired our entire agency, and we had like 2 commercials we were running. We had 3 campaigns that we were doing. And I woke up to a call from the agency being like, Anita, what's going on? What happened? I was like, I don't know. And that warranted a conversation. So that's like not necessarily they're like going beyond the scope, but it's in violation in some ways to our agreement, to our statement of work, that I'm supposed to have autonomy, that I'm supposed to be leading this, and I had no communication. So it left me in a bad position. I couldn't do my job. So I think in those cases, I just thankfully again I can advocate for myself. So I did have a conversation about it. It was just, you're going to run into those types of characters and personalities all the time, right? So again, I think one of the biggest things is learn how to advocate for yourself, understand your rights, and the statement of work can help that. It'll help you a lot.
I absolutely love. I've never heard that phrase before. Like advocate for yourself. I love that phrase. What have you, from your experience over the years that you've been doing this, what what have you learned that is a signal that someone's treating you more like a consultant for a specific problem to solve compared to a fractional? Like, what are the telltale signs that you've gone, this isn't feeling right?
Yeah, I think that when I started seeing myself not involved in conversations, that's a bigger thing. Or it's like less about like overall goals and what we're working on and just being like finish this one task. And then the lack of autonomy. I think those are flags for me where it's like, okay, I'm a partner at your table with you, and this is what we talked about. I'm not just someone you hand off work down to. Let's have a conversation. So good communication. If it starts going bad, or if I just start seeing poor communication, that's when I kind of know. I think like that's a very big thing. Again, this is really important for me because I want to work with people that I enjoy working with. This is a very important part of my life. I think, well, everybody, we spend so much time at work. Shouldn't we have a choice of who we work with, that we work with people that we actually enjoy? And so if someone starts not like reflecting those values back to me, that's a big thing. That's an interpersonal thing for sure. And I get to choose. And then the second part is if I start seeing it being like I'm not involved in conversations that I should be in anymore, then I'm starting to understand that maybe the nature of what they are expecting from me or where something has changed, and that warrants a conversation again.
Yeah, makes sense. I want to try and shift gears slightly. So you told us earlier that you sort of go in kind of a 6 or 12 month cycle, depending on then how you're vibing with it. You might stay for longer and bits like that. During that time, it sounds like you are building a marketing function out and then sort of reversing your responsibility out. So I just want to spend a little bit of time and understand one, how you do that, and then two, a little bit of like what the offboarding looks like for you to set the client up for success. So when you go in, and let's just assume you're an early stage startup, maybe, I don't know, 3, 5 people in the team. If it's anything like the startups I've been involved with, like everyone's a jack of all trades. You've got visionary, salesperson, integrator, but they all do a bit of everything. When you're thinking about building a marketing function, what's the approach that you take? And like, what are the hires when you think about that team structure? How do you deconstruct that down into like the most important hires? Because I think there's potentially 2 ways of thinking about it. Is like, do we go for junior heads and train them up while you're there, or do we go for senior heads and then put the right resources underneath them? What's your process of building a marketing function?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on like what the goals are and what we can accomplish in the time that we set together. Typically, what I love is like within the first couple of months, identifying really quickly where we're going and then getting someone senior that I can like work with to develop this. I come in for more of the strategy. I'm happy to do execution. This is also a conversation I typically have with the founders or the CEO, where it's like, okay, what percentage do we need right now of my strategy versus execution? Given that I've been in a lot of startup situations as a single marketing hire, I am a jack of all trades. So I
Sleeves are
can
very rolled up in the previous roles, 100%.
I just jump right in, and I actually do enjoy it because not at the same time I get to shape it to a certain degree, but then I love having someone come in at a senior level, maybe someone that is already junior, but can like I can upskill them a little bit before I leave. They'll have all the institutional knowledge. They learn with me. That's a big thing. I love personal development. I love being able to help people grow into their role. So I'm kind of split. I'm okay with teaching. It depends on how we've structured my arrangement with the company. If that's a bigger part of it, then I obviously can't do anything else, right? If they're like, we just need you to help with the strategy and bring this person up to speed, then that is I've been in that situation where I've helped understand like what's the strategy for the next year plus, and can you bring this person along so they can just take it from you when you go on. So and like a senior person typically, and then from there, depending on what we're doing, we do use a lot of freelancers. So I've done like a lot of freelance PR stuff. I've done a lot of freelance hire people to do blog writing, things like that, where we have that function. So just to help supplement, it's also very based off of how much the company is making at that point, right, and the revenue and what's available. A lot of these companies, given at the early stage, don't have a massive budget, so we're looking at maybe one hire at the beginning with a hiring path that's outlined dependent on revenue goals. So if they actually make conversions and sales, then let's talk about like, okay, we're going to build. We know that conferences are really hitting home for this B2B SaaS company. We're going to say we need an events person, and that's going to be the first hire because they're going to run with it, right? So it's just like we know that's going to bring in more. And I always like whenever I'm talking to people about like audience segmentation and stuff like that, I think the biggest thing is like what I call like your beachhead customer. It's identifying the one that's going to grow the most. So I typically would be like, okay, like we just are going to focus on a hire that'll help us get that beachhead customer based off the channels we know work for them, and then help them get that kind of market share, grow in there, and then build out depending on like other goals for the year ahead. So start with senior, they grow together, they see me do the strategy from the beginning, they learn with me, and then I hand off and go. So lots of knowledge sharing. I do a lot of documentation. I do a lot of process setting. I really love building out processes, bringing in a CRM. I swear, I feel like I should become a HubSpot affiliate. I brought them into every company I go to. Why am I not getting kickbacks?
You should set up as a partner. It's easy to do.
100%. Just on the word partners there, Anita, I think it's interesting. You mentioned like you're bringing in like freelancers to, I guess, as a nice way to dial up or dial down needs without putting like a head in the team and that fixed cost. How much of what you do as a fractional is, I guess, building a trusted network of freelancers? Do you go back to the same pot of people for different clients? Is that like one of the values of hiring a fractional based off your network? How does that work?
Yeah, I think in a general sense, like because again, going back to what we talked about earlier, where it's like I found it to be quite lonely being in this space by myself, going from working with a big team to like nobody. I do look for people to work with or to even talk to. So I'll go co-work with people, let's say, but sometimes I'll find people to build networks with where they're like partners, maybe other CROs, people who are like maybe engineering managers that we can refer each other to like, and other clients, things like that. I've done that with other freelancers too. So I have built quite a robust network. Also, just like really nice to get people like ideas and work with them on things. And I definitely have ones that I trust. I'm also a writer. I've done a lot of freelancing in the past. So I played in that space before I got into like the actual like marketing leadership type of consulting and fractional work. So I did a lot of writing, and that's kind of I think one of my strengths as well, for sure, where it's like I do know the right people and I know how to find people to bring into the team for these contracts as well. I I do think that fractional employees understand the value of that. So they would have a robust network. Quite a few of them I know have a really strong network.
I think it's because you've got the empathy for the other side of the table as well. Like you know what it's like to be a freelancer or someone that's not in a full-time gig. So
Yeah,
I think there's just a level of like empathy and probably mutual respect and understanding for both parties of how you set up the engagement and how you treat each other. Um,
absolutely.
I teed up that earlier in terms of like how you build up that team. What does effective offboarding for you look like when dealing with a client? Because I think so many times we set ourselves up success as best as we can for like onboarding ways of working, but we don't necessarily think with the end in mind. What can you share with the audience to go, here's how I successfully offboard a client and set them up for success?
Yeah, so we hope that we reach the goals that we've set at the beginning, and that's kind of like the biggest we hope. But I think it's so funny. I do a lot of mentorship and talk to a lot of early stage marketing companies just for advising, and it's always like no matter how good you are with setting some of these goals, things will shift, especially early stage. So I think just as like framing for where I come from, things are always in flux, and you can't always like success at the beginning, what you set out and what success at the end looks like for an early stage startup is different. So we
How
learn.
often are you touching base with the client and checking in? Because if you've got a 12-month engagement in a statement of work as an example,
Yeah.
how often are you revisiting that and going, is this still true?
Yeah, so quarterly, I attempt to do that quarterly. I think that's really important to do because I can't succeed if I'm going off old assumptions of things, especially if we like have learned so many things in that little bit of time where it's like it just didn't work, X didn't work, now we have to move over to Y, and it's like basically enshrined in the statement of work, right? That it says this, I'm beholden to that. How can I how can I succeed then? Right. So I think that's a very good point. And I think I'm glad you brought it up, because I think I'm in constant communication with my clients so they know, but updating the statement of work as like an actual like factual document that we have to hold ourselves to is once a quarter. So constant communication in a general sense, I would say like you should be building in checkpoints all the time. And I don't think you can be successful if you're not. You need to know what's going on. They need to know what you're doing. I think that there's the accessibility, the transparency, and the visibility into your work, because you will run into skeptics. And I think like if I'm talking to them all the time and we're learning together, then again, I'm a partner in it with them. So they know that they're spending well. Also, there's a hesitancy because, there's the costs that comes from bringing someone fractional on, even if like it makes sense when you look at the numbers versus a full-time employee, you're still spending money and you're early stage startup. So you're just thoughtful about how you're spending your money. And you're also maybe beholden to investors, right? So you have to be thoughtful about that. Anyways, yeah. So you hope that by the end of the tenure, you've hit all of your goals or whatever they've morphed into at that point. And I think like being really real about that sort of stuff is really important. Having like a postmortem, sitting down, talking about things. I typically try to build in postmortems after every campaign that we run, especially if they're bigger ones. Let's say a product launch, we will have a sit down and talk about how it went. I think bigger goals in terms of like actually building the marketing function. Let's see, like some of the things would be like, okay, having a like robust CRM, like having those as like, goals that we work towards, or OKRs that we've built into what we do. That's really big too. Like having those really high level OKRs that ladder up back into the business. And those are set at the very beginning. So for one client, for example, it's like a 10% increase in sales or bookings by the end of this year. And that's less than 12 months, but let's say like 8 months, and like using that.
I've got two things I want to jump into. I'm sorry, Sam, I'm grabbing the mic here, but I'm just like playing. There's so much stuff I want to unpack with Anita. Um, I'll go for the most recent thought first, then I'll go back to the other one. You mentioned uh, costs. Just you said when we talk about costs, how do you think about your pricing as a fractional? Like what's and I'm not saying that we jump on and go how much are your rates, but maybe just the theory behind how do you deconstruct the value that you bring and then play that back to a client. 'Cause I think so many fractionals are fantastic at the craft at what they do, but packaging it up and communicating that value is a different skill set. So I think that's one thing I want to try and play with a little bit on the mics and share some of, I guess, the community's experience in that. How do you think about pricing and packaging up that experience to make sure that you're capturing the value compared to just swapping time for money?
Yeah. I think about in a general sense, like all that I'm able to do, and it's not just in one area, especially given how much I've seen and how much I've done. I've done like product marketing. I'm a copywriter. I build websites. I do it all. So it's like having all of that under my belt, I come in with that. I also think like just there's something so we don't put a lot of value or we don't talk about it. It's just like being easy to work with, being someone that takes things off your plate. And as a CEO, you don't have to worry about it. Things are going to run. Anita's got it. That's also a value. And I think I bring that to the table too. So I think also just as a high, like a very, very, I have to say this, it's like I'm a woman and I'm a woman of color. And a lot of us have a lot of problems with articulating our value when it comes to a dollar amount, and women in general. And this is a big thing we see also with salaries and asking for money or negotiating a pay raise. I think this is a big issue. So I've thankfully worked really hard on being like, no, my value is this, and this is what I'm willing to exchange for my hourly amount. And then from there, understanding the scope of work in terms of a retainer. So the retainer amount
One
that I do.
sec, Anita. I don't want to gloss over that because I think it's what you just said is so powerful and will probably resonate with so many people. To use your words, as a woman and a woman of color, that you became an advocate for yourself. What have you learned on that journey? And I know it's such a hard question to ask you off the cuff on the mics, but if you were to give any advice to other women in that position, what's the thing that you'd want them to hear?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of inherent imposter syndrome that we all feel, but chances are if you made it this far, you bring value, you have value, and you know what you're talking about. I fight this all the time. I say in the last few years, have I only really stepped out of it? And I'm like, no, I know what I'm talking about, even though it's like 10, 12 years in marketing. And it's like, well, what do I know, right? We'll find all the reasons to say that, no, we don't know, but we do, and we have value. What I also say is that I try to raise my rates every 6 months. And if I'm negotiating a raise, and I tell this, I talk to a lot of my friends about this, other women in my life, because I think we need to talk about this. But I say, go in and ask for 30% more or above. And if that number doesn't scare you, then you're not asking for enough. And so, is that's like for a full time job or whatever, or like, according to like whatever it is, but like, you go in big and start like negotiate and feel confident in who you are and what you bring to the table, which I know easier said than done. I lived in that space for a long time, but the more you practice it and the more you believe that you deserve it, you are going to deserve it. You embody that. And I would just go in and I would just put myself in like a really uncomfortable position and feel the burn. Sometimes I hear no, but that's okay because I knew my value. And I started learning like right off the bat. I had this one proposal I put out, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go in with a big number. And I'm like, this is what I think I'm worth at this point. And I felt very uncomfortable. Oh my goodness. I like looked at the number like 6 times before I sent the email. I like erased it. I put another number and then I erased it. And I'm like, nope, nope. I need to just go with it. Just jump in. And I pressed the send button and I was like, it's in the universe. It's gone now. It's just, I can't do anything about it. And you can tell if you're going to want to work with somebody based off how they look at your value too. So when I put it out there and I got well, nitpicking, that's a lot. Oh, I don't know, like, why would I just hire a full-time CMO if I'm going to pay this? Well, it's like, no, because we have to do our own taxes. No, because we have to do our own, all of things. We don't get benefits. We don't get time off. We have to factor all of these things into it. And so I think like, I also see then, and I really believe this, that if they're going to nitpick my value based off my amount, then I don't want to work with them.
As you were talking then, the quote that came to mind, I don't know where it comes from or who to attribute it to, but it's that whole get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that is like, as you were talking, I was like, it's such an important skill. So hard, like you say, so easy to say, but so hard to do. But I guess just showing up and doing that, practicing being that, sitting in the uncomfortable zone. I just urge everyone to do that. So, I think because to your point, once you put it out there and the first person says yes at that bigger number, I know what happens to people like me, Sam, and you, Anita, which is like when they say yes, you actually feel like, oh my word, I now have to over deliver. Like you actually probably lean further into that because you're like, they've paid me this much. I now need to over deliver. So you really lean in just on the numbers. And I don't want to spend too much time on the transactional nature of the numbers, but I think it's really helpful for people as they're listening is in terms of like you working out that rate, how do you think about that? Is that you think of a number that you think actually every year I want to earn this, and if I take my Fridays off and I deconstruct that down to a day rate, this is what it is? Or is there like another way of working it where you go where you assign time to the value?
Yeah, so I think just like at the very beginning, I did the first aspect of it where it's like, okay, here's how much I think like I can earn. I also did a lot of Googling and I was like, fractional CMO, hourly rates. I feel we all have done this. And it's like, okay, if this is the benchmark and I'm just starting out, I'll move up just a bit based off my experience and I try to keep it defensible. So for me in my head, it was like, oh, okay, this is a benchmark and I'm here because I have this much experience. And then now, 4 years in, I really base it off of kind of like, no, I've seen a lot. I've done a lot. I've seen a lot of success. Now I feel like it's like based off of what value I bring. And that perceived value might come from me, but it's over a lot of time of understanding what I bring to a team and seeing the impacts of me being there. So it's less about like having the need to defend myself in the number I'm asking, more like if you aren't willing to work with me at this level, then I know there will be people that are willing to work with
Mm.
me at this level.
I think there's sort of like three things that play into, I suppose, how you can communicate your value. But it sounds by what we're talking about, which is like, first off, you got your experience, which is 10 years, and I think you mentioned like imposter syndrome earlier on. Some people suffer with that more than others. I think I definitely did for a long period of time, and I'd say it took me about 8 years or so to start coming out of that imposter syndrome mentality. And if I'm honest, it probably still happens today, just on a just less than it did. Right? When I put myself in an uncomfortable situation, it kind of creeps in. So I think that's quite common. But I think the confidence comes from that experience, right? So if you've got that experience, that can breed confidence because you have to remind yourself that I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen a lot of things. and I know what I'm talking about. But then, you've been doing this for 4 years, which means that you might have started out at X rate, but now you've got like success 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 underneath your belt, which means that obviously you can command more rates and you can increase that over time. So I think those kind of three things, so like experience, confidence, and then actually having the successes that you can point to as previous engagements. Obviously, those things over time, they can compound to increase your rate. And I think, we'd like to get away from, I know I like to get away from thinking about time for money. Like, hey, I'm worth this much an hour. But in some way, shape, or form, it always comes back to that, right? It just does. Unless you're selling a product. And we can productize our service offerings. That's something that we can look at, and that's something that I've dived deep into multiple times. And I know some of the other guys in the community are also talking about that as well, and that might be an interesting topic for this week. But I think it's hard to get away as fractionals from the price per hour unless you can go into the conversation to very clearly articulate that if you hire me from this amount of time, based on all the research that I've done, I can increase your revenue and profits by this amount, and then you can charge like a piece of that as the value pricing.
Sam, I think what you're, I guess, scratching the surface of here, which is, I guess, one of the inherent challenges of being fractional, because as Anita said earlier, like one of the rebuttals is, well, at that price, why won't I just hire a full time? Because they can save as an FTE, which is full time, 5 days a week. They know how much that could and should cost in market at a salaried rate. That is the benchmark. And we also have that, I guess it's like that challenge squared, where it's actually also Anita will only work on a Monday and a Wednesday on that client. By definition, we are selling time at that point. And by the way, I think it is that is the only way we can navigate multiple clients. Like if we've got 3 clients, we have to set boundaries between them. Otherwise, we're going to do a disservice to each of them. So it's really, really hard to decouple time from like how much we charge and decoupling that from time. And if you sell a productized service, then I would argue to say, if it's completely productized and it's I come in, I do this, and when I get you to here, or they're buying like a crow audit of the website, that's a product. That's not fractional work. That's consultant / agency work. And I think they're the lines that we're probably all playing with.
Or you can do that value play, right? So you can say, look, I'm going to come in as part of the team, but I'm willing to take the upfront risk because I back myself to increase your business by X amount in the future, and I want a piece of that because the risk that I'm willing to take now is worth it because I back myself to achieve Y.
I nearly went down that rabbit hole in terms of like asking about equity as well.
Why don't you just give it, if we've got like a few minutes to spare, why don't you just give us like a quick rundown of how you think about, because I know that you've talked about this in the past. We're just talking about this in terms of like time and value pricing, but like you've talked about equity, taking equity as payment for services in some situations. Can you just give us a quick rundown of like what that looks like for you typically? If you were to, and in what situation would you propose that?
Yeah. Oh, like there's so many amazing startups out there. And I think that's one of the things that gets me so excited about the work I do. And I do a lot of mentorship, like I said. And I'm also, I'm an entrepreneur in residence for a lot of cohorts, like 2 different cohorts in Toronto of early stage startups. And I get to just see these people in action. And sometimes I drink that Kool-Aid and I'm like, wow, like you have the next Canva, you are going to change the world. Like, and they're like, yeah, but we need marketing help. And I'm like, I could do that. Like, I'm like, that could be me. and then they're like, but we have no money. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, but I love what you're doing. And I love you. I see the value in you as like a leader. And I've seen a lot of bad leaders, but when I see a good one, that's when I'm like, okay, I have a gut instinct sometimes now. And I feel like this is over through like years of watching and observing. And in those cases, sometimes I'll offer a lower rate than my typical retainer amount and ask for equity in return. And I've done that for a few in the last like 4 years. I'm okay with doing that. That's a choice that you have to make if you need the money right away and you need to get paid just to sustain and live a certain way. It's your value, it's your choice. I think for me, it's to your point, Sam, it's like it's a risk and like there's upfront, like I have to give my time and my energy, and you have to be okay with that, but the payout later could be there. It could also not be there. So I could be shooting myself in the foot a little bit. But at the same time, what really helps me with that is the belief and me feeling like, oh, that they're gonna do something great. So that helps me feel okay. And that's something that's one of the things I'm okay with. Some people might not be okay with it, but I think, if I know down the road, like maybe this could be something great and I trust that, I will give my time for a lower rate. And, it might not be as like robust as I would with like my regular clients. It might be a different situation, but might be more marketing advisory. There's different shades to what I do, especially with early stage startups, but it's a lot of guidance too. So you have to have the time to be able to allot for that. It could mean something great in the future though.
I think there's an added benefit actually, Anita, which is the way that you said it, it's like you kind of identify someone great. The company might be great, but that leader might be great as well. And there's that old like expression which is like betting on the jockey, not the horse, so the founder, not the company. And like if you go in, whether or not that company works and you build a relationship, you'll probably be the first person that they call if you've done a great job and as an advisor on their next thing. So you end up building like a great roster of like A players, which is like, cool, I'm helping these people. And at some point in their career, they're probably going to hit a home run. Had to use an American analogy there because you're from Canada. I know. I kid you like and I was like, okay, Canada. There we go.
Not the same thing. Okay,
Not the same
not the
thing. I
same
know.
thing.
I went American analogy, and then I was like, oops.
Well, we're
But
close.
I think you end up with like a wonderful network of like A players in your roster as well, which is fantastic. Anita, I'm very mindful of time. You've given up so much time already. I guess just as a quick actual thank you from like me and Sam for putting your hand up and being really supportive, not just in the sessions, but for the extra work you're supporting with to help build, I guess, the awareness of infraction and our fractional work. As we wrap up, what are the things that you want the audience to hear specifically? Because I was going to try and drive this conversation around like fractional work as well as like trends in marketing. We're going to have to bring you back on for a specific episode around what's new in like marketing today. But from a fractional conversation, what are the things you want that the current fractionals that are in flight or fractionals that are in full-time employment thinking about making the leap? What's the stuff we didn't get to that you just want to like highlight before we wrap up?
I think that like this is where we're moving towards. So I'm really excited to see people pushing towards this. I think there's more of, in my opinion, there's a lot of value here for a lot of companies. Other people might think differently, but I think that like what I've noticed is like I think it's smarter to hire someone that's fractional. I think that, I'm tactical. You bring me in for a specific purpose, almost like a mercenary, and I come in and I do my job and I can move on. You get what you need as a company. I move on to other greener pastures. And I say this because, like, for those who are like thinking about making the leap, like, there are alternatives to like working. You can actually like working full time. You can actually really highlight where you play best and really double down on that and find value there instead of just like hoping that you can grow with the company and staying in a job that might not be fulfilling. You can have more governance over your time. And for those who are already fractionals, I think like really make it like, or like even just starting off, I really believe in just like making the process as easy as possible. I think that I like I said earlier, there's such value in being easy to work with and providing less friction. And so like operationalizing things, making it very easy to get the stuff that you need done. I actually think that sometimes I get hired for that because they trust me to just take things off their hands. And sometimes that's what people just need. And that's okay. Right. And I'm okay being that person too. But I bring other value. Let's be real. So there's a lot. I feel like I have a lot to say to both of those audiences, but I think the biggest thing is like, this is the future.
Well, I have no doubt that this is the first of hopefully many sessions with you, Anita. But if someone's got this far in the pod and they're like, I want to connect with this lady, where do people go to connect with you?
My website, anitachauhan.com, or go to my LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably best. My website needs some love.
We'll drive your LinkedIn in the show description. So guys, if you listen to this, wherever you're listening to it, hit the show description, hit the show notes, and connect with Anita. I'm sure she'll be willing to have or carry on the conversation from today. But for now, Anita, thank you so much for giving up your time and for your support of Infraction. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have spent the time. Nice chatting with both of you. And yeah, I'm excited for the future.
Awesome.